A son returns home to find that his mother is in a serious relationship with a man she recently met. However, the more he learns about the stranger's past, the more he realizes the man might not be who he says he is. In a house in the Salt Lake City suburbs, Grady Edwards dyes his jet black hair brown and shaves off his beard. Then, the man removes his brown contact lenses, revealing his blue eyes underneath. Later, he carries his luggage to the front door and he heads to the kitchen for some toast and coffee. On the dining table and in the living room are the lifeless bodies of his wife and children, and his calm demeanor implies that he was responsible for their deaths. As Grady rinses off the mug, the bloody weapons he used to murder his family are in the sink. Eventually, the man grabs his bags, exits the house, and drives off. At the Salt Lake City Police Department, Captain Mackey asks Detective Shea if he thinks the woman's ex-husband Dylan is a suspect, but the cop says he was elsewhere drinking his sorrows away because it was his first Christmas without his family. Detective Tyler adds that the man's reaction to seeing his ex-wife and children's bodies essentially proved that he had nothing to do with it. Then, the captain wonders if the stepfather Grady Edwards did it, but all the cops know about the man is that he was from Kansas and he isn't traceable in any database. Tyler believes Edwards was also responsible for a similar case in New Jersey 3 years ago when a woman and her 3 kids perished from gunshot wounds to the head and the stepfather also disappeared. The man always paid his rent and any purchases in cash because no photo ID was required, and he always targets widowed or divorced women. 6 months later, in a grocery store in Portland, Grady sees Susan dealing with her arguing children, Sean and Beth. He politely interrupts and tells the boy to always be nice to his sister, and the mother appreciates his advice. She sees the ring on his finger and says his wife must be very lucky. So Grady lies and says that although he continues wearing it, he lost his wife and daughter in a car accident last year. In the parking lot, Susan approaches Grady and asks if he wants to join them for pizza. She explains that she's recently divorced and she'd welcome the adult conversation. When she introduces herself, the man says his name is David Harris. 6 months later, Susan's son, Michael, arrives home from military school with his girlfriend, Kelly. He says he can't believe his mother couldn't come to the airport, so Kelly explains the woman was busy, which is why she offered to pick him up instead. Then, Michael asks if she's met his mother's fiancé, and she says she's seen him a few times and that he seems alright. However, the team thinks Susan is rushing into things by getting engaged to a person she met 6 months ago, so the girlfriend says it's his mother's business what she does with her personal life. Suddenly, Kelly opens the back door to reveal that Michael's family and friends are there for a surprise party. There, he hugs his mother, siblings, Aunt Jackie, and Jackie's girlfriend, Leia, all of whom he hasn't seen in a year. Eventually, Susan introduces her fiancé to her son, who's visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Later, the woman asks Jackie and Leia if she's crazy for getting engaged so fast, so the sister assures her that David loves her and everyone thinks they make a great couple. Then, the man proposes a toast to thank the family for taking him in and making him feel welcome. Despite giving a respectful nod, Michael says he feels nauseous listening to David's speech. Meanwhile, Susan tells her fiancé that Jackie was able to get him a job as a real estate agent, which the man appreciates. Moments later, David approaches the son and tells him to meet him in the basement in 4 minutes. On his way there, Michael sees that there's a lock outside the basement door. After descending the stairs, he spots newly installed locked cabinets on the wall. Suddenly, David appears and explains that he keeps his carpentry tools inside them. Then, the man pours them some liquor and says he wants them to be a real family. He adds that he'll talk to Susan and make sure that Michael won't have to return to military school. He says he learned that the son's a great swimmer and shares that he used to swim competitively at the University of Oregon. Then, David encourages him to practice because he could get a college scholarship. That evening, Michael asks Kelly if she can give him a ride to the DMV soon so he can get his driver's license, and she teases that she'll think about it because she likes how dependent he is on her. Later that night, Susan tells her fiancé that she thinks it's best if her son stays in military school for his senior year. The man tries to explain that the best place for the teen is at home with the family, but she says he didn't see how disobedient and wild Michael used to be. In his room, the son puts on his headphones so as not to hear the couple's lovemaking. The next day, the man speaks to Mrs. Rivers, the athletic director at the teen's old high school. Later, he relays the good news that he was able to get Michael a spot in the swim team for summer practice. One afternoon, Sean doesn't listen to his mother after she tells him to turn down the volume on the TV. Suddenly, David marches into the bedroom, aggressively grabs the boy by the neck, neck and turns the volume down himself. In the kitchen, the man sees Michael and Kelly being very affectionate in the pool and wonders if they're doing too much. However, Susan says she doesn't mind because the girlfriend's a good influence on her son. That evening, the mother notes Sean's strangely timid behavior. Then, the teen learns that the man lost his wife and daughter in a car accident, explaining why he always mentions how important family is to him. Suddenly, Susan's ex-husband Jay arrives to pick Beth and Sean up. David wonders why Michael didn't say hi to his father, but the latter says he doesn't want to. Later, the man asks the teen if he wants to have lunch together tomorrow. The next day, the cat-owning neighbor, Mrs. Cutter, stops by to talk to Susan. In the kitchen, the woman sneezes because of her cat allergy and tells her fiancé that Mrs. Cutter said the TV show America's Most Wanted ran a story about a serial killer where they showed a police sketch that looked just like David. However, she waves it off because the elderly neighbor has a reputation for spreading unnecessary gossip. In the diner, the man asks the teen to be his best man at the wedding, and he accepts. Then, he says meeting Susan at the grocery store that fateful day changed his life, especially after losing his wife and daughter Michelle. Seconds later, he mentions how it was supposed to be his daughter Lisa's 11th birthday next week, prompting the confused Michael to point out that he thought his daughter's name was Michelle. To cover up his mistake, David says the child's full name was Lisa Michelle. That afternoon, the deranged man angrily hammers a sign in front of the open house while thinking about how he almost got caught in a lie. After work, he checks the America's Most Wanted website and sees the Grady Edwards police sketch. Later, David sneaks into Mrs. Cutter's house, throws the elderly woman down the basement stairs, and holds his hand over her nose and mouth until she perishes. In the bedroom, Michael and Kelly make out, but she stops when she thinks someone's watching them through the open door. When the teen goes to check, the man suddenly appears, prompting the spooked girlfriend to grab her things and go home. Michael asks if he was watching them, but David says he just got home from work. During dinner, Susan sneezes and wonders if Mrs. Cutter stopped by while she was out. So her fiancé says the owners of the house he showed that afternoon had cats. Moments later, Jay barges into the house and confronts David for grabbing Sean by the neck. The man explains that he had to discipline the child because the father hadn't done a great job. To de-escalate the situation, Michael holds Jay back and picks up the phone he dropped. Outside, the son gives his father back his phone, and the latter says he doesn't trust David because they barely know anything about him. Then, the man apologizes for everything that's happened in the past year and assures that even though he and his mother are divorced, he'll always be there for him. Meanwhile, David apologizes to Sean and promises it'll never happen again. From the window, the man watches as the father and son share a reconciliatory hug. In the bedroom, Susan emphasizes that they never use physical force to discipline children in their family. Later that night, the teen wakes up to use the bathroom and he hears David mumbling to himself downstairs. In the office, Jackie asks the man to fill out the necessary forms and submit a photo ID so they can finally stop paying him under the table. Because he can't risk placing his picture onto any kind of database, David tells Susan that he's decided to stop working as a real estate agent. When she asks why, he says he realized it wasn't a job he enjoyed. While the woman's out having drinks with friends, Jay stops by, hoping to say goodbye to the kids before he heads to the airport. Then, David answers a call from Susan who asks if her ex-husband has arrived at the house yet, and he says no. Moments later, Jay reveals that he called the University of Oregon alumni office and learned that only 4 David Harrises graduated in the last 30 years, none of whom coincided with the time the man claimed he was there. He adds that he only did some digging into his past because he promised Michael he would. Suddenly, David knocks the man out with a vase to the head. Because they're busy loudly playing video games upstairs, Michael and Sean ignore the noise. The unhinged man pays the taxi driver and takes Jay and his bags down to the basement. Then, he suffocates the father by placing a tight plastic bag over his head. Concurrently, Jackie tells her sister how strange it is that her fiancé quit his job the same day she asked him for details about his life. Later, the man tells Susan that he thinks Michael's upset that Jay never showed, and he apologizes for breaking her crystal vase. Meanwhile, Leia tells Jackie that David always paying in cash whenever they go out to dinner does seem strange, so the woman says she'll call Jay since they both share the same suspicions when it comes to the man. In the basement, the man uses Jay's phone to text the teen stating that he did a background check on David and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Then, he places the phone in a bag inside the locked cabinet. The next day, the man sees police cars outside Mrs. Cutter's house. From the window, Michael overhears his conversation with a mailman who says the neighbor had an accident and her niece found her this morning. However, when the teen listens to David relaying the news to the family, he specifically says Mrs. Cutter fell down the stairs and broke her back, details the mailman never said. Later, Jackie calls the man and says that even though he no longer works for the office, she still needs him to fill out the forms for the state and federal tax papers. While the couple fills out college applications by the pool, Michael tells Kelly his suspicions about David. He says Mrs. Cutter ended up dead after telling his mom about the police sketch. Then he included details about the death that the mailman never told him. However, Kelly thinks everything he's saying could just be coincidental, especially after his father confirmed that the background check came back clean. After the man leaves to pick up Sean and Beth, Michael and Kelly head inside the house to snoop through his things. However, Susan calls her fiancé to tell him to return to the house because she'll pick up the kids herself. They hear David enter the house and they successfully evade him and return to the pool where they pretend as if nothing happened. During dinner, Susan asks her son if he's heard from his father, and he says the last text message he received was an apology for not stopping by before his flight, but every call since has gone straight to voicemail. When Beth touches David's hand to ask if he's okay, the man envisions the last family he killed sitting around the dining table. That evening, the teen calls his girlfriend and says she's probably right about him being paranoid, and that he's better off focusing on their college applications. However, after the man enters his room to have a serious talk about trust, Michael sneaks downstairs to use the computer. To his surprise, the America's Most Wanted website autofills the search bar, and he sees the police sketch Mrs. Cutter was talking about. The next day, he shows Kelly the printed out sketches, but she still thinks what he's insinuating is a stretch. He adds that he couldn't find any photos of David around the house because he doesn't like to get his picture taken. Because Michael seems more interested in his investigation than their college applications, the annoyed girlfriend storms off and heads inside the house. In the kitchen, David says that since they'll be family soon, she can talk to him about any matter involving Michael because they both want what's best for him. Seeing the creepy way he looks at her, Kelly quickly covers up and says she has to go home. In the basement, the man sends another text using Jay's phone saying that he'll call his son back in the next few days. Then, he receives a message from Jackie wanting to speak to Jay about David. Suddenly, the phone rings from a call from Michael, and the teen hears the ringing through the vent. He heads downstairs to check the noise, but he finds the man on his phone in the living room, and he realizes that probably explains the ringing he heard. When the teen asks where the key to the basement door is, David says he was wondering the same thing. While the man isn't looking, Michael secretly takes a picture of him using his phone. Later, Susan tells the family that it's looking more likely that the son's staying in Portland for his senior year, and her fiancé responds with a strained look. That evening, the woman says he's taking Beth and Sean to a friend's house who'll be driving them to summer camp tomorrow. After his shower, the teen checks his phone and realizes that someone deleted David's picture, so he heads to Kelly's house and tells her what happened. He adds that the basement door key also went missing, leading him to believe that the man's hiding something down there. That evening, the man intercepts an email from Jackie to Susan where she tells the sister to consider hiring a private investigator to check her fiancé's background, especially since he keeps refusing to give any identification for insurance and payroll. To cover his tracks, David deletes the email. Later, he breaks into the woman's home and drowns her in the pool. Eventually, Susan returns home and the man says he just got back from a jog. Because the woman complains that she has trouble sleeping when it's stormy outside, the fiancé suggests she ingests sleep medication. Meanwhile, Michael asks Kelly to stay in the car and keep watch because he'll try to break into the basement. The teen grabs a flashlight from the garage and squeezes through a window into the basement. Then, he uses a crowbar to open the locked cabinets and finds his father's bag and broken phone. Outside, Kelly sees the living room lights turn on, but when she tries to call Michael's phone, it falls and shatters on the floor. Because he doesn't answer, she decides to try and sneak into the house. To the teen's horror, he discovers his father's body inside the freezer. Concurrently, David catches Kelly looking into the broken basement window and knocks her out. Michael hears the commotion, but the man quickly blocks the exit, locking him in the basement. Eventually, the unhinged killer drags Kelly into the house, so the teen bangs on the door. The noise wakes Susan and she finds her fiancé in the kitchen. He says he thought this was the perfect family for him, but but he was wrong. He berates the confused woman, stating that she did a poor job disciplining her disrespectful son. Suddenly, he says that she could have been Mrs. Grady Edwards, and after seeing the unconscious Kelly, Susan realizes that he's the serial killer Mrs. Cutter warned her about. The deranged man chases her upstairs and she tries to hide in the bathroom. Concurrently, Michael finally escapes the basement using the crowbar and helps his girlfriend up. As David kicks the bathroom door down, the mirror shatters and Susan grabs a shard. When the man lunges at her with a knife, she swiftly stabs him in the neck with a broken piece of mirror and he falls into the tub. Moments later, the trio reunites, but David blocks the stairs, forcing them to flee into the attic. While he tries to fend off the unhinged killer with a crowbar, the teen falls through the rotten boards. So Kelly tries to distract David by threatening him with a bandsaw. However, in the chaos, the mother and the girlfriend fall through the ceiling and back down to the second floor. Seconds later, Michael tackles the man through a window and they end up on the roof. During the scuffle, the teen pushes David off the roof, but when he peeks over the edge, the killer grabs him and they both fall to the ground 2 stories below. 1 month later, Michael wakes up from a coma and learns that the man escaped before the police arrived on the scene. Meanwhile, the deranged murderer now works at a hardware store where he meets a woman who lost her husband 2 years ago. Just as he did with Susan, the man claims his wife and daughter perished in a car accident last year and introduces himself as Chris, implying the unfortunate continuation of his demented search for the perfect family.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.